So, VK on the beat, check. I'm in Toronto where you wanna get a city love. I'm from Toronto where you wanna get a city love. I'm in Toronto like we wanna get a city love. My city love me back for my city love. I'm in Toronto where you wanna
Welcome to episode 1610. 1610 of Toronto Mic'd. Proudly brought to you by Great Lakes Brewery, a fiercely independent craft brewery who believes in supporting communities, good times, and brewing amazing beer. Order online for free, local, home delivery in the GTA. Palma Pasta. Enjoy the taste of fresh, homemade Italian pasta and entrees from Palma Pasta in Mississauga and Oakville. RecycleMyElectronics.ca. Committing to our planet's future means properly recycling our electronics of the past. And Ridley Funeral Home. Pillars of the community since 1921. Joining me today for this first episode of 2025.
Happy New Year!
Happy New Year! It's the Toronto Stars, Ed Keenan.
Hey.
How has your, Christmas time?
2025 so far, so good. I'm basically starting it here. So, but yeah, the holidays have also been good.
Like, did you work this week, or did you get some time off like everybody else?
I took last week off around Christmas. So Christmas and
I've lost
Boxing
track.
Day
Like, was Christmas
are
last
stat
week?
holidays? Yeah, they were last week.
Yeah.
Midweek. And I took the entire week off, and then I worked a couple days this week. I had yesterday off for the New Year's Day holiday,
Right.
and now I am back hard at work here.
Well, this is working.
I came
right?
from work, and now I'm here.
So
and
were
I
you
will
working
return to
remotely
work.
today, or were you at the well?
I was
or-
working remotely. So we did Toronto Star office for people who don't know by any chance. It used to be at One Yonge for years and years, the Toronto Star building here. Before that, it was at Bay and King, right where First Canadian Place is now, and it had a iconic, beautiful Toronto Star building that was the model for the Daily Planet building in the Superman comics originally.
Right.
But it was replaced. They moved to One Yonge, and then a couple of years ago we moved to the Well at 8 Spadina, and so I work there 1 or 2 days a week, depending. I have an office at City Hall. The Star has an office at City Hall, so I have a desk there that I work 1 or 2 days a week, or I go by when City Council's sitting or when there's things I need to do there, and then I work occasionally from home, which is what I was doing earlier today.
See, I'm keeping tabs on you.
Yeah.
I'm micromanaging you, Mr. Keenan.
So if people are trying to keep track of me,
I need a GPS device. Can you
That's
wear one
right.
like around your neck or something?
share my location with you on an iPhone or something.
Oh, I'd love it. I don't have an iPhone, but we'll figure it out. Okay.
Okay.
How do you feel then about One Yonge Street being demolished? This is kind of news. Recent news.
I'm gonna try and find the updates on that, because we have known for some time that there was a plan to redevelop the whole site, right? And they have been in the places where One Yonge Street's parking lots were. They have been building skyscrapers for a while. And as part of that complex, the plan was to build additional stories on top of the One Yonge Street building and then reclad the whole thing. If people know, it has had that Toronto Star sign that's blue and white at the top of it, but that it was this brownish, I'm trying to remember the name of the building material. It's like that brown concrete with little stones in it. It's got a very 1971 look.
Right.
And I've never found it a particularly attractive building. So I'm not sure that I know there's a demolition permit, and I'm not sure if that's to actually. You may have read further updates since I read the initial stories about it, that the demolition permit had been issued, and so it looked like the building was going to come down and be replaced. But it was unclear to me explicitly whether that demolition permit was to allow for partial demolition. So
I think it's toast. I think that thing's just being raised.
But I will say. When the Star moved on, a lot of people who worked in the newsroom there, including people who worked there for decades, felt nostalgia and attachment to the history, but nobody really felt like the building was working for us. Right now, we had like wasps would come out of the vents at certain times of the year.
Oh, actual insects. Not the wasps.
Yeah, and there were like a lot of mice, and there's a lot of sick building syndrome there, and it was like it needed a lot of work. In a lot of ways, the well is just a vastly superior workspace. It's much more modern, but it's also like, you know, nicer views, less dingy feeling inside. So, I mean, what we don't have at the well yet, and we're developing, is like the feeling of it being a newsroom, partly because like people are working remotely a lot. And so, you know, you don't always have that frenetic activity and like, oh, there's the guy over there, I'll go and talk to him, and there's my editor over there, I'll go talk to her, and all of that. A lot of the meetings and stuff are still taking place remotely. But I mean, much of that feeling, much of those vibes come from the history there, right? And that history is what we make now. So I mean, I have mixed emotions about One Young being taken down. I never particularly loved the building. I almost never drove there. I almost always took public transit, and is not like the walk down from Union Station has gotten somewhat more interesting in the past 15 years, but is still kind of like in the winter when it's windswept. It's whoo.
All right, good riddance. Now I'm going to explain why I have
You're holding
brick. I'm holding a brick because, okay, so this is
all
all going to tie together nicely, as it typically does when you visit every quarter, by the way. So somebody who moved to Japan, actually, but was living right beside the Galleria Mall when they were demolishing part of the Galleria Mall, went out to grab me a brick. And then I realized, oh, I don't need the Galleria Mall. I actually just need a brick. So maybe you guys all get like here, you can hold it if you want.
This is a brick from the Galleria Mall.
Yeah, that's from the Galleria Mall.
Is this a floor tile from the Galleria
I don't know.
Mall?
He just said this. He delivered it and told me he rescued this from the Galleria Mall.
This shade of red, like bricky red, but it's got like a kind of tile dimensions. But I think, like, here's the thing: is that the exterior walls of the Galleria Mall, but this is not from the exterior. I don't think
probably from the interior.
More brown. But yeah, the walls and the floor both had that kind of like
70s brown.
Yeah.
Kind of like One Young Street, actually. But so really, you need a brick. But
I have a very fond memories of Galleria Mall, too. Have we discussed this before?
Remind me of your
My
fantastic
dad
memory.
worked there.
Okay, I don't think we have discussed
When
that.
I was a kid, he was store manager for the Towers department store chain.
Was an anchor at that Galleria Mall before it became a Zellers.
So originally, we lived in Riverdale, and he would walk to work at Towers Riverdale, which he grew up in Riverdale, and that's why he got a job there, and he was still working there. And then they moved him. They actually he would apprehend shoplifters, and then they would follow him home and know where he lived. So then they moved him to a different part of the city on purpose.
Smart.
So he worked for a long time when I was a kid at Galleria Mall, and my brother and I would go participate in the Towers fashion shows there for back to school.
Oh,
and
I
stuff.
have seen these images because Mark Weisblatt emails them to me every week.
Mike Bullard got a hold of them at some point, and used to refer to me as like male model. And I would say like, well, though I was kind of a child model, I guess, in
But your dad worked there.
But my dad worked there.
That's how you got. You weren't there for your good looks. Okay, but Mike Bullard, shout out to Ridley Funeral Home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Since your last visit, he
has passed on.
He has passed on. Okay, so you need a brick from One Young Street. I just want to say hello to brand new FOTM, one of the many talented people you work with at the Toronto Star, Doug Broad.
Oh yeah.
Drop by. He wrote a book about the guy who started the Church of Satan, and he came by and we had a late night chat about it. It was very spooky. It was very interesting, and I would just like you to welcome Doug Broad to the fraternity.
I will, and if I see him around the well, I will welcome him even more in person. But so now I don't know if people know this. If it escaped their notice, it was like a lot of talk at the press gallery Christmas party where all the politicians and their staff come about
I think Cam
City
Gordon might have
Council
been there. Okay.
declared
Yeah.
December Christian Heritage Month.
Oh, good. We need.
I don't know if anybody got that, but it was a big deal at the.
That's like a white pride
the
parade.
thing. Right, that's what I was saying. It has very like
Or straight
white
pride
pride,
parade.
White
Yeah.
History Month or straight pride parade
Yeah.
vibes to it, right?
Like, I don't want anything to do with it because it's like no, like.
But
we need these special months for the oppressed.
Councillor Nick Mantis proposed this. It was like a private member's motion that December should be, and then there were some speeches about how Christianity needs to be like shown a little respect after all this time, and Lily Chang, I'm pretty sure, made a very emotional speech about how what Christianity means to her and how important it is to her. And so despite the objections of some members of council, notably Gord Perks, who shared, I think, your and my sentiment.
Well, it makes me feel icky to think we're going to have a Christian Pride Month or whatever.
The thing is that the way it is observed, the month of December is already kind of a Christian Heritage Month. Yeah, you got Hanukkah in there and Kwanzaa and whatnot, but it's really like the month of Christmas.
Right,
which the birth of Jesus is like
he's a big deal in Christianity.
The biggest, yeah. So it's related, right? But so anyhow, they declared December Christian Heritage Month. But my colleague and fellow FOTM, I'm pretty sure David Ryder, had been saying, and maybe we should talk to Doug about this, is that like. Really, you're opening the door here because if you got Christian Heritage Month, the Church of Satan is going to come along and say we need to have like Satanic Heritage Month. Like,
true that. And a quick Doug fun fact is, I'm told he's the one who decided. If you see that picture behind you, all right. So that was, I don't know, a few years ago now, but I was.
That picture behind me is of Mike on the front of the Together section of the Toronto Star.
Doug tells me this was pitched to him by a young Gilles LeBlanc, and Doug said that's a great idea, and that's the reason that got published was Doug giving the thumbs up to the Toronto Mike cover story.
That was a part of his long game to get on the show.
It worked.
And it finally paid off.
It worked. He got himself his Palma pasta. He got himself his Great Lakes beer. He's now in FOTM.
All about it's like a big scheme to get past.
No, he seemed like a bright guy. Pretty bright for an American, right? So on that note, you were there January 6th for the insurrection. I will remind the listenership, you didn't participate, okay? You weren't wearing a big mask, and you weren't, in there smoking in some congressperson's chair or whatever. But you were there because you worked for the Toronto Star, and you were stationed near DC.
I was in Washington, D.C.,
Yeah, I know. Yeah, thereabouts. And then you were there, so you were covering that. And I'm just wondering for your thoughts, considering since your last visit, there was an election in the United States of America, and I'm told Donald J. Trump, he won again. Is that true or false?
He did.
So my first question is: is he going to be number 45 and 47, or does he stay 45?
So. I think he's
because you get two numbers.
47.
If you're the same human.
Well, but he's like there was a 46th after him, right? Yeah. So then he's also the 47th president of the United States.
Even though he's the same guy who was 45th. Just food for thought. You can give me your thoughts.
Well,
now,
I mean that's the thing. Is kind of like if I was the. Yeah, if you're counting presidents, he doesn't count as two presidents, but he is in the sequence of presidents. He occupies two different slots, right?
He's a two-termer, but he had Biden in the middle. Biden was the meat in that sandwich.
He's the second president to serve. Well, he will be once he serves again. He become the second president to serve non-consecutive terms. Only the second.
So, what are your thoughts? Say no more.
It's going to be a tough few years ahead, and it's this back and forth. I think I mentioned during the election campaign that I go back and forth from being really kind of jealous of some of the people who do get to cover it because the story, there's so much of it, and it's so consequential, and so much happens when Donald Trump is around, and yet being so glad that I don't have to go down because it gets kind of depressing and grinding. And after a few years, it just feels like, like there's one too many sequels here in this movie, and we've kind of seen the beats of the plot are all the same, but he's got to kind of ratchet up the crazy a little bit, and it feels like that's what he's doing now.
He brought along a billionaire now. It's a little different.
And so there's yeah, that's his his
Cato Kalin?
No, I was gonna say I'm trying to remember the name of a Poochie.
Yeah, Poochie. Yeah, there was Itchy, Scratchy, and Poochie.
Elon Musk is the Poochie. It's like he needed a new character to keep the new season lively, and so Elon Musk gets to be that.
Like Cousin Oliver.
Yeah, but yeah. I mean, I think we gotta hang on tight and hope that we can somehow narrowly avert disaster, because I think, and it probably won't be a surprise to anybody, and probably there are many of your listeners who already think this. So, but that I don't think that the threat Donald Trump posed to like the integrity of American democracy and the entire American system of government was overstated by the Democrats. Maybe it wasn't a message that was resonating with people. Maybe a lot of people are like, Trump derangement syndrome. He just makes you guys crazy, and so you're all screaming about authoritarianism when Biden's the real fascist, or like the puppet of the real fascist, and all of that. But I do think that he has like real strongman authoritarian tendencies, and there's no boundary in government, but also in the rest of his life, for his whole life, that he won't just push against and push against and push against until somebody pushes back. And the systems of American government, and especially the Republican Party that he leads, have shown almost no pushback, right? And so I think this time he comes in with more experience, more knowledge, but also, and I think this is important, right? Just to take a step back at the risk of rambling on, which is what I do, but is that like, if there's this picture of Donald Trump always trying to like born into wealth, but not into New York old money high society, right? He's never like accepted by the establishment.
The great Gatsby here.
And so he's kind of trying to prove himself all along to the people who get to, admit you into the club and say, okay, you are one of the elite. You are one of us, right? And as a rich guy, and a famous rich guy, he never really got into that. He was always this boorish and like, decorating in solid gold and like hosting a reality show based on the concept of how rich and ruthless he is and all of that. It's like, it's all this kind of act, but he's made several gestures that are trying to like make him respectable. And I think when he first became president, he was at sort of an extreme for American politics from the beginning, but like the people he appointed were people who knew how Washington worked and who had a certain level of respect among the Republican political establishment, right? Like people like Bill Barr and his like first chief of staff. And he was choosing experienced generals for important positions because he thought, those are clearly tough guys, right? But he didn't like, his experience of that was that like, these professionals, they try to enforce like constitutional conventions. They try to put rules on me. They're not like blindly obedient to the president. And I think he's learned from that mistake, and he's appointing a lot of like absolutely ridiculous people. But I think they're very ridiculosity. There's a sense in which you could say, okay, well, maybe there'd be incompetent boobs. But there's another sense in which not only are they, a lot of them, like cuckoo, but beyond that, they owe everything to Donald Trump. Like they are nothing without him. It's not like they had some established, successful career and a legacy of public service that he is going to, call into. And so he's pointing people who won't push back. And so I think this time he just barrels over a lot of it a lot harder. And I don't know how the system recovers from that, because just to conclude, and this is true in Canada, it's true everywhere, right? Like most of the guardrails and constitutional rules of our whole society exist like basically because we agree they exist, right? There's no police department who comes and says, you can't overstep your constitutional bounds. Like, and if the Supreme Court decides on, if you like appoint, even Supreme Court decisions are basically upheld by our collective respect for the court, right? And to the extent that the U.S. Supreme Court has lost a lot of its integrity because of the way the appointments were rigged up, and the partisan nature of their decisions recently, even still, like even there, the only thing keeping the president from overrunning that is the president's own sense of respect for the Constitution and shame and the order of government. And then ultimately, at some point, whether the military is willing to stand up to him or not, because that's the other thing. He's the commander-in-chief of the military.
You were right out of the hopper there. Buckle up. Like,
yeah.
This is going to be a hell of a 4-year ride here.
And for Canada, it's going to be, oh, boy. Like, I don't even know. Like, even as we speak, by the time we end this, who knows if Trudeau will still be clinging to power or not. But it's certainly, like, whether it's a Liberal leader or whether it's Pierre Poilievre, or whether it's like an NDP leader or somebody else. Like, I just don't know what the right strategy for a Canadian prime minister trying to deal with Donald Trump is, because you don't want to be like a minion of Donald Trump. You don't want Canada to become the de facto 51st state that Donald Trump keeps musing we maybe should
which
be.
I don't find those jokes funny at all.
Yeah. But also, like, you don't want to give him any reason to try and prove himself, right? Like, and it's this weird thing of like, how do you stand up to him without making him feel like you're publicly insulting him? Because honestly, and this is not about Donald Trump, it's about the United States in general. Like, we don't have a lot of cards to play in a head-to-head confrontation with them. Whether that's a military confrontation, whether that's a economic confrontation, like however you want to play it, like. We don't fight in the same weight class as them, and so we're not gonna win if we trade punches with them, even metaphorical punches.
No, absolutely.
And so it's like, well, how do we navigate that? How do we stand up to them without making them feel like, okay, it's time to give these guys a solid beating? And I don't know the answer.
No, that's a tricky balance, right? You want them to be distracted by other things. Like, I think that's the strategy, right? Even when I think he went off on a Panama Canal or something, and then I was like, okay, there's something shiny over there to focus on. Stop looking up here. Like, I just want him to like forget we're here.
Yeah. Like, remember when you were going to buy a Greenland?
Right.
Like, maybe you could do that. Maybe that's start talking about that again.
It is scary shit though, because there's no checks and balances there, right? They got the House, they got the Senate. He's got his yes men lackeys.
He's got
there's
a
no
Supreme
checks
Court
and balances.
that he appointed.
Yeah.
So
we have to kind of hope. At this point, you're waiting out the 4 years, hoping the Democrats get their shit together and can win a Democratic election. You're hoping there is a Democratic election in 4 years.
Well, and yeah. I mean, that's it. Lynn Cheney, who was like as loyal a Trump vote in Congress before January 6th as existed,
right,
and whose father was Dick Cheney, who you might remember from an earlier episode
shot
of
a
like,
buddy on a,
oh my goodness,
trip.
this evil mastermind of the Republican Party is running the country. And so not like a raving liberal lunatic.
Right.
But Liz Cheney was saying with a straight face that she worried that if Donald Trump was reelected, it might be the last election or the last legitimate election in American history. And you know, so you do worry about that, and what's much more likely than that he declares himself dictator for life and there are no more elections is the kind of like soft, like democracy in name only authoritarianism that we've started to
like
see
Putin.
in other countries, like Putin, like in Turkey, where the elections are kind of increasingly rigged. And it becomes more of a one-party system. But there's still, like, the widespread observance and happy talk about democracy and democratic institutions, but that they function more and more as, like, a rubber stamp for whatever the boss says. Because, and you see last time he was there, Donald Trump expressed publicly his frustration that his attorney general and Justice Department would not pursue his political vendettas, right? That is how he thinks the government should operate, is that the president is the boss. And of course, the police department, the federal police are going to be weaponized against his political opponents. Of course they are. And that's the way he thinks it should be. And last time, and I don't want to belabor this point, but when John Bolton was named his Secretary of State, people were like, whoa, he chose this right-wing cuckoo, like war hawk, like John Bolton was a career professional and a intellectual of sorts, or like a thinker or a speaker, like a guy who's known to talk about foreign policy and whatnot. But he was not sort of like any kind of centrist mainstreamer. But there's a point where he started trying to extort the president of Ukraine, Donald Trump did, for dirt on Joe Biden. Like, I want you to dig up this information about Joe Biden and tell me what I want to hear. And John Bolton was one of the ones who, he said, I'm not participating in this whatever drug deal these guys are kicking up, right? Like, I'm not a part of that. And he was like ultimately one of the whistleblowers on it. He wrote a book about it.
Right.
And so, like, it's not like he chose like weak-kneed consensus, like mushy middle of the road people last time, but he did choose people with enough integrity to say, like even Bill Barr saying, like no, we're not, we're not pursuing these political vendettas on your behalf, right? We are not, like, I'm not dropping investigations into you just because you tell me to. Like, that's out the window. So anyhow,
Ed,
yeah.
I'm glad. So you're committed. You're going to be here every quarter of 2025. I feel like we need you more than ever to just talk about what's going on
As
here.
long as the calendar alerts keep coming up on my phone, I guess I'll keep showing up.
Whew, okay. A couple of notes from the live stream, because we're live at live.torontomike.com. One is from YYZ Gord, who just wants us to know that they're still talking about recladding One Yonge Street. So I've got it demolished, but what do I know, right? So apparently that's still the talk.
Yeah, well, this is what I thought. This is what I was saying earlier, is that I think there were news reports, including one in the Toronto Star, about the demolition permit being issued. And I just read them the day that they came out.
Right.
But it was like, I guess they're tearing it down now, was the gist of those news reports.
Right, that's what confused me.
And when I was reading it closely, I'm thinking, well, maybe a demolition permit is issued because they're going to demolish some of the exterior facade of it, because they're going to demolish some of the interior to build up and all of that. And so the building may still exist, but it's not going to look anything like it does now, and it's not going to. It's going to still be a new place, but
right now. Back to the Trump thing just for a moment, since we're all hoping he doesn't, come and take us, because who's going to stop him, right? I'll be at the border with
going to be like Red
my
Dawn.
hockey stick.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I had a hockey stick and a hockey mask, and I was ready to go, but I don't know.
I see you got it. You got it hanging up here.
I'm
It's
ready.
the Jacques Plant
I am ready,
Jason mask, which will just scare them away.
All right, Canadians, I'll be broadcasting to Canada their orders. Okay, grab your hockey stick, go to the border. We're going to defend this place. Moose Grumpy wants to know, what are your thoughts on world support? Like, right now we're all like, oh, he's joking, right? And like, we're all just kind of hoping these are just bad jokes. But at some point, what would the world do to support Canada? Should there be something more real to this noise, and or would they be afraid to support Canada because that would, tick off the all-powerful USA? This is a very scary future. I feel like I'm in the middle of like a dystopian future movie, and this is what lies before us in 2025.
Just to be clear, I don't want to lead anybody to believe that I think it's likely that Donald Trump is going to send troops across the border to occupy Canada, or to formally take over our government, right? But I do think his joking about it is one of those things where, like, whenever Donald Trump, like, he tells the jokes, but it does reflect how he thinks of us,
100%.
right? Calling Justin Trudeau governor of the great 51st state of Canada shows where he thinks we are in the pecking order, where our leadership is in the pecking order, and he doesn't make those jokes about Russia and Vladimir Putin, because he respects Vladimir Putin and thinks Russia's a big heavyweight country, right?
Right.
And so then I think the concern is less that they're actually going to physically try to take over Canada, and more that they're just going to try and like kick us around like a kid on the playground, and do that economically, do that in many other ways. But it theoretically it could come to even more drastic than that. But I do think there's still a threat to Canada's sovereignty in that, is that if we're treated as a client state, if we're treated as a minion who will do the bidding of their master or else, we just become that, right? De facto, that. And now the question about how the rest of the world reacts is like an interesting one, because I do think there are other countries in the world and an international community that has legitimate respect, not just lip service respect, to like international law, to like the way we negotiate things, the way we follow rules in our interactions with each other through trades and all of that. But I also think that, like, I worry, and I think we've seen some signs that, like, in the same way that the institutions of American government, in the same way that the Republican Party as an institution, lots of people talked big about standing up to Trump all the way along. And then when push come to shove, did not stand up to him. In fact, often knelt down and kissed his ring once it was clear that they weren't going to win that fight, or that, you know, there would be a high cost for them to pay. You know, like Kevin McCarthy, right after January 6th, right, who was the leader of the House Republicans, right, the House of Congress. So he was one of the people who was under siege. He was there when the, you know, insurrectionists took over the building. He was with the others, like, barricaded, you know, behind doors, worrying that he was about to be hanged, right? He called Donald Trump, reportedly, and said, like, you have to call off these people. Like, you're the only one who can stop this. And he said, you know, maybe you should have been more loyal. Maybe they have a good reason to be angry with you. Maybe you should have done what I said, right? And so after that, he was like, we're done. We're done. Even he was standing up to say, you know, Donald Trump is no longer. And within a month, he was at Mar-a-Lago begging for forgiveness because he realized, oh, the masses of the Republican Party will never let me, you know, live this down and all of that. Like, and Trump was no longer president at that point. And I think in the international community, there's a lot of that where people are kind of trying to manage him. Like, they don't want to piss him off. They don't want to provoke a confrontation with him. And they're trying to steer him towards thinking they're on his side. And so, you know, I have a good idea that you came up with. Remember how you came up with this good idea? Like,
we've all worked with personalities like that, right?
But I do think that if he puts his foot down, I don't see a lot of countries in the world who will stand up and make a point of it. Like, it's just hard to see. And you do think that maybe through an institution like the United Nations, you know, maybe, or things like the G7, that these fellow countries would figure out a way to, like, the European Union would figure out a way to sort of, like, get together and stage an intervention. And yet it is hard to see when, especially the other kind of superpower-ish kind of countries, like including Russia and China, would not be opposed. Like, they like a chaotic authoritarian American, right? Like, and so I'm hopeful, but I'm not certain that it would. Like, and so we have these institutions like the United Nations, like NATO, like the World Trade Organization, right? They do the World Health Organization. Like, the interesting thing about these institutions is how quickly you start to realize, and look at NATO as a prime example, that they depend, like, they work really well as multilateral institutions as long as the United States is operating in a spirit of goodwill, right? If the United States is a good faith player who is as good as their word, we signed this treaty, we will all defend each other come what may, right? As long as the United States is the strong power in that, and the biggest player, and everything hinges on their participation. If they decide, screw that treaty, I hate this idea, well, like, are Canada and Great Britain and France going to get together and what? And what are we going to do?
Right.
I mean, we can try and shun them, but, like, in terms of military defense, like a mutual defense pact, we don't have a lot of cards to play because they are the defender, right? And maybe it was a mistake for the rest of the world to let them grow into that position unopposed, or with the only opposition being, authoritarians and whatnot.
Right.
And yet, but here we are. And so Trump is not wrong that Canada should be spending more on its defense, right? When he talks about NATO dues and stuff, you get the impression that there's a protection racket where we're paying money to the United States. That's not actually how it works. And most of like what we're behind on there is actually our own spending on our own defense. Like the Canadian defense budget is a very low part of our GDP,
Right.
which means we're not all that useful to our allies when they get attacked and we say, okay, we're going to help defend you. Like, we don't have a lot of firepower to send over. We don't have a lot of soldiers and technology to send over. And so the U.S. has to pick up the slack. And so Trump didn't originate this complaint. Barack Obama used to make the same complaint. Presidents before him of both parties made the same complaint. Canada needs, and other NATO members need to pull their weight in this organization. Trump's the only one, though, who made it like a mafia protection racket, where he's like, if you guys don't pay up,
Right.
something bad might happen to you.
Right.
And instead of defending you, maybe we won't. Right? Like, what if Russia comes through the Arctic to invade Canada? Who's going to defend them if not the U.S.? But if you haven't paid enough, why would we come and defend you?
Good point. Good point. No, good point. I'm thinking of that Simpsons episode where the Springfieldians met the Shelbyvillians of the lemon tree or whatever, and Martin Prince was protected by Nelson Muntz, remember? And he was kind of being annoying, but Nelson's like, oh, I gotta protect him. He was the bigger guy. He's a Springfield guy. And I'm thinking, yeah, for too many decades, we've been like, don't fuck with us, because our very strong, powerful neighbors to the south, they've got our back. You come in our space, they're going to stomp you down. That's too close for comfort for them. And you do get that comfort and that reliance, and that can be a bit, so you can kind of mouth off a little here and there, because you don't got to worry about the protecting yourself, because you're going to just let your big brother to the south do all that.
Exactly. And
this is what happens, Ed. This is in the Marvel comic or with the DC comic, this is what happens. Okay, so we got to move on. So we're going to get hyper local now. We've covered world affairs there. Stay tuned. Every quarter when Ed Keenan's calendar alarm goes off, he's going to come over here to New
hyper
Toronto.
local.
We're going to get hyper local. So, okay, so we spend a lot of time on this show. We shit on things for 2 hours every quarter is what I think it all amounts to. So I'm going to start things off with a little positivity, and then I'm going to segue to a nice note about you and something you wrote that was very positive. But what I just want to share with everybody is the other day, I think it was the 29th of December. It was only a few days ago. My wife and I and our two little ones decided on a whim, let's go to Niagara Falls. Okay, they have this great light show at night, and they got the falls, of course, and there's fireworks at 8 o'clock. So we're like, okay, here we are, not too far from the Mimico GO station. Let's go get from there. We'll go to Niagara Falls, and I'm just here to say that and again, people are like, yeah, you just discovered the GO. No, I bike everywhere, okay? But we have a car. We have a car. It's in the driveway right now. But so I think typically, like in the past, we'd probably drive to Niagara Falls. But we're like, I don't want to drive. So we got on the GO station, the GO train at Mimico. We took it to Burlington, and we jumped on a GO bus, and we took it to Niagara Falls. And it was so damn slick and pleasant and economical that, Ed, I don't think I'll ever drive to a destination like that
right
again.
Into the GO train, we'll go right into Niagara Falls,
did. So I had an 8-year-old with us, and it was like a nice walk. Like, it wasn't too freezing. There's a bit of a walk. It drops you off.
So it's not like you're getting off in St. Catharines or something.
No. You're in Niagara Falls.
Yeah.
You're in Niagara Falls. But there's a little walk if you want to go to the falls in Niagara Falls. There's a bit of a walk, but it's nothing too bad. I don't know. We walked for like 15, 20 minutes or something like that. And it was so affordable and slick and so pleasurable. And the kids had Wi-Fi because they don't have data plans, and they could plug in their crappy devices when it runs out of battery. I just found it so enjoyable that I don't see why I'd ever make that drive ever again in my life. So I'm just sharing some positivity.
Yeah, well, no, that's great. I mean, I find it a mostly pleasant drive unless you're making it at rush hour.
You're saying, get your ass off that GO bus, Mike.
No, but I think, a GO bus.
Well, it was the train only takes you to Burlington.
Right, okay, and then you transfer onto a bus.
To a bus, yeah.
Okay, but no, I'm glad to know that that's pleasant. I'm glad to know it's a good option. I didn't know that, but I have long thought that, like, proximity to Niagara Falls is, like, this great thing about being in Toronto, and maybe everybody already thinks that's great, but I don't. I went on a couple school trips. We went now and again, but it was like only after I started making family day trips there
Right.
when my kids were young that I was like,
Oh, it's close.
this is legitimately a wonder of the world here.
And amazing at night. They got it so well lit and everything.
Yeah.
And it was kind of a mild evening. And they did the fireworks at 8 p.m., which is a good time for the 8-year-old. And
Did you hit up like a wax museum or?
No, we didn't do any of
anything like
that's
that?
Clifton
No?
Hill stuff.
Yeah,
Like,
I
we
love
didn't-
the Clifton
Yeah,
Hill stuff.
so we got the hot chocolate. It was mainly walking. We actually got a hotel room for the night because we came back the next day. No Clifton Hill stuff, but in the past we've done that where we've got a hotel and we've done.
Were
the
you
Clifton
doing
Hill stuff.
hitting the casinos?
I never touched the casino.
Wow, that's good.
Never touch it, but
Yeah,
it was there.
I'll clarify. When I say I love the Clifton Hill stuff, like what I actually like doing and my whole family likes doing is just like walking up and down Clifton Hill. Like we very seldom actually pay to do any of the attractions, but
They got big-
they all
big
have
gorillas and
displays in their lobby and that, and
Right.
and so we do those. And like sometimes we ride on those go-karts or play the mini golf in the summer. But yeah, anyhow.
I'm going to ask you about a Toronto death that just broke a couple of days ago, and then read that nice note that came in from a listener who read something you wrote. It's very positive.
Oh, okay.
So that's like a teaser. I'm doing like a radio thing now. You know radio things, right?
Coming right up.
Coming right up after the break.
What did one listener say? Yeah.
The 5 things you should do on New Year's Day. Okay. So this is about Sweet Daddy Siki.
Yeah.
So you and I
Oh,
are
my.
vintage here. We're going to talk about this because you're 1 year older than me. So I always know you'll kind of connect to the things I connect to. And wrestling legend and Toronto resident, his real name was
Sweet Daddy
Reginald
Siki.
Siki, Sweet Daddy Siki.
Who was like a karaoke master in the East End.
And he had a country music album because I was listening to
Yeah.
it on YouTube the other day. And he was like a Stampede wrestler in Calgary in the 60s. And you'd see him, if you're of a certain vintage, you'd see him at Maple Leaf Gardens. And he lived near the Dufferin Gates of the C&E. So he'd sit on his porch and he'd wave to people coming into like the Blue Jay game or the Argo game of the C&E. That's in the 70s and 80s. He played a mean guitar. Like, he's just kind of one of those characters, fascinating characters. Gone. But I feel like, you'll speak for yourself, Ed. That's why you're here. But I am 1 year younger than you. And I think we missed him. I think we missed the bulk of the Sweet Daddy Siki. Like, I was of a WWF early 80s
Yeah, that's
thing.
I was going to ask you because I thought maybe you would have big memories of it or something. But
No, I missed it.
because my wrestling years, and I was never like a huge wrestling fan, but I got into it,
So like this guy?
during the King Kong Bundy,
Yeah,
the
George
George the
Animal
Animal
Steel.
Steel,
Yeah.
Hulk Hogan, Andre the Giant years, Macho Man Randy Savage.
Oh, I have a question about that coming up.
And so what I knew about Sweet Daddy Siki, actually, a lot of it came from an article that somebody wrote while I was working at iWeekly. I was editor at iWeekly, and I commissioned the article because it was sounding so interesting to me. And it was like this former professional wrestler who you can now see at, like, I think at the time it was like the Duke of Earl pub in the East End or whatever, running karaoke nights every once a week. But it was like a fascinating profile of him, and I got so into it. But I was going to ask, like, was he on All-Star Wrestling? Was he, like, where would... Because I didn't go see live wrestling at Maple Leaf Gardens.
See, I
and stuff.
did, but I saw it in that era you're talking about with Andre the Giant and Big John Studd, and you mentioned Macho Man.
So I don't know what promotion
He was gone by
with,
then.
yeah.
He was gone by then. But he did train guys like guys that came after my era, but I know of because they're famous. The Edge,
Oh, yeah, okay.
Christian.
Mm-hmm.
He got his own month in December.
Right, that's
okay.
Heritage Month in
So he
December,
was
that's
like
right.
training some big names from more recent history, but he was a legend in like the 60s and 70s. But I think if you're our age, you missed the Sweet Daddy
I think-
sweet spots. So I'm just remembering
Yeah.
a lot of people just like 10, 15 years older than me are talking about this guy and their memories of this guy, and I feel like we just missed it.
Yeah.
All right, so rest in peace. Shout out to Ridley Funeral Home, Sweet Daddy Siki, kind of a Toronto legend who we learned about his passing just a couple of days ago. Okay, Walk of Life is a gentleman on Blue Sky. By the way, I saw you liked one of my posts on Blue Sky. Are you checking in on when your mentions on Blue Sky?
Yeah. The plan is to do that much more frequently than I have been.
I'm
but
watching you,
We've
Ed.
had the holidays and all of that. So, if anybody's just catching up, I used to like use Twitter a lot, and I was like, and then I was more of using it as a reader because I was finding the level of engagement I was getting with my own tweets was like more noise than signal. Like, and the fights I was getting into were affecting
there's a
my
lot of
mental
people
health
picking a
with,
fight on
like random strangers and all of
X.
that.
Yeah.
And so, and then after a while, I was just like, ah. So the account is still there, but I haven't even opened the app, like, to see if, like, in months, right?
So
but
you
then when
don't open
Blue
it all,
Sky,
like-
when everybody
Go
made
ahead.
the Great Blue Sky migration,
Right.
I like went and signed up for an account, and I spent a couple days, you know, I skied it or whatever you want to call it a couple times, but I also was like finding it useful, like, and fun to like read along, and
Right.
you know, the Leafs people I followed there were there, and during games, if I'm just at home watching by myself, it's like sitting in a bar. You get to hear other people's commentary. It's like, oh, a lot of what I used to like about Twitter is here,
Right.
And so I'll use that more often. And then it kind of got busy around the holidays and that, and I just haven't really opened it. But I actually opened it to check if you had
Promoted you?
promoted this. Well, you know, just because I don't like to break our I'm like superstitious about actually like
confirming?
texting
Like,
you
hey,
to
are
say,
we
hey,
still
are we
on?
still on? Because it's there in my calendar, and I assume if there's a problem, it will disappear from my calendar. But I also just like, so yesterday I saw that and I liked it.
And
but
you went, phew.
but
I'm
people can
still on the
find me
agenda.
there. They can, you know, message me there. And as it stands now, I'm not like a daily power user, but I think I'm going to start using it more in the way I used to use Twitter, which is to like share my own thoughts.
Well, we need you there, Ed.
and
I'm
stuff,
enjoying
but
it there,
also
but I
to
need you
follow along other people's, because what
Right.
I miss most about Twitter, and this was what made it absolutely necessary when I was in the U.S. covering the U.S. government, but also before that was like super valuable in Toronto, is that like journalists will make the mistake of thinking that social media represents popular public opinion and all of that.
Right.
But what it is very useful for, it's not, right? It's not a stand-in for the average person on the street. But what it is useful for is that all these average people on the street and also powerful people are sharing real-time thoughts and images and reports of what's happening where they are. And I used to love that in Toronto, is like you keep tracks on all these things. And as a journalist, what I would often see is that somebody would say something was happening somewhere, and then I would do more investigation. I would either like go there,
Yeah.
or I would phone the people involved, or I would like, and just get ideas and keep tabs on what's happening.
Right.
And keep track of multiple meetings or things that are like, Matt Elliott is a essential source of like coverage of Toronto City Council meetings, because he's just, you know, live tweeting through it. He has every vote there. He has every whatever there. So it's like, that's what I love most in my work, was most valuable about Twitter. And I'm hoping that kind of community and that kind of responsiveness is like emerging on Blue Sky, and it'll be like valuable to me that way, and also I can contribute to that value for other people. So we'll see.
Well, I think it is. The Keenan Wire, everybody, and then follow at torontomike.com. I got the domain name, so you know it's the real me, okay?
Uh-huh.
Except no substitutes. So follow at torontomike.com and follow the Keenan Wire. Andrew Ward, before I read the Walk of Life's note, I've teased
Okay.
it 4 times now. I'm going to just tease it the whole freaking episode. I'm never going to read it. But Andrew Ward wants to know if you would please do another Randy Macho Man Savage. Oh, yeah. So I'll sit back.
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Good, because, you know, I talked over the first ones. He gave me a second one. And I said, he gets it. This guy gets it here. So thank you to Andrew Ward. He has another note later in the show. But Walk of Life says, Ed Keenan's piece on reasons to love Toronto was a great read. Please pass along my thanks.
Oh, that's nice. This was particularly reasons to love Toronto in the wintertime. And thank you, Walk of Life. And what I will say about that piece, which I came up with 17 reasons, is that I partly wrote it, like in large part. I mean, so a little behind the scenes here is that often when you're going to have a holiday, you write a column or two that can run when you're gone. And they're not like
Time
ripped
sensitive.
from today's headlines. They're not
Right.
breaking news. They're kind of like, what's a concept that can last? And I didn't want to do a like top 10 things that happened in 2024 or whatever, right?
Right.
But I was actually feeling like I needed somebody to convince me that winter wasn't going to be a big drag, that there are good things in Toronto in the winter. And so I kind of came up with a list of like my favorite things, but also like I asked around some other people, but like, what do you love about Toronto in the winter? And it, because my kids, when we moved to Washington D.C., or the DMV, the Virginia, D.C., Maryland metropolitan region, which is south of the Mason-Dixon line. It's not really in the deep south of the United States at all, but it is, south of the Mason-Dixon line. The climate's a bit different. You might get 1 or 2 snowfalls a year. It's a big deal when they happen. The snow doesn't really stay around. I didn't actually use my snow shovel the entire time I was there.
Wow.
But we did get to go tobogganing once or twice in 3 years. It's like, basically it's like 10 degrees Celsius warmer there all year round than it is here, more or less, right? So it's not like it's tropical in the winter, but it is like, you could get by in a light jacket. Those vests, it's like a parka, but with no sleeves?
Of course.
And Michael J. Fox wears one in Back to the Future. And my whole life I have looked at those. My dad used to wear them with like a sweatshirt, but then he would wear a parka on top. But I was always like, what is that for? Like, when is there a time I don't want... But they're really popular down there because it's kind of like just cool enough that you'd like an extra bit of insulation, but not so cool that you need to like bundle right up. And I kind of miss that, like winter. But my kids were like, they love skating outdoors. They love playing in the snow. They love tobogganing. They just like there being snow. They really missed the winter season. And so when they were talking about that, I was like, let me talk about the things some of the things, including like how many free skating rinks there are everywhere, that like I didn't know how much I liked them until I moved somewhere where they didn't have them, right? So
very nice. So some positivity. There's still things to love in the city.
Do you have a favorite thing about Toronto in the winter?
Oh, that's a good question.
I know you.
We
bike
barely.
in the
I mean,
winter.
I biked. So today I'm already at 30K, and I have another little ride left to do today. So I'll end up today at like 45 kilometers. And that's. But there's very little winter I find in Toronto. Like right now, it's
compared to what there used to be. Yes,
well, right. Like the snow doesn't seem to stick. We had snow for a few days. I actually shoveled once. Which was wild.
But I mean, like
I don't know. So
my thing is that we really start getting winter in January, and then it lasts through early March.
Right.
Whereas there are some other places like DC where your winter is really December and January, and spring starts in February.
Right. Yeah, our Februaries can suck, for sure. But so what do I like? So we all went, the Distillery District has that great winter.
Yeah.
They call it the winter market, not to be confused with the Christmas market, but now there's a Christian month, so they don't need Christmas. Right? But before 4 o'clock, it's free on a weekend or whatever. So we'll like time it so like we'll be there before 4 o'clock.
You get there during the free time.
Right. Absolutely,
Yeah.
because now you used to always be free, by the way. But we were just there. I do like the Sam Smith in the south of Etobicoke. They got the Sam Smith skating. That's really nice.
There.
And
that's nice.
we'll go there, and we're still like my daughter, my 8-year-old biked to. Well, it's not school right now because school's Monday, but it's a YMCA childcare type program I pay for. That we biked to it and we'll bike from it. So like we're still biking around the city when there's no like ice on the ground. And even then, just I go out. I don't bring the kids so they can live to fight another day. But I don't know. It's not a particularly cold city, I find. So I mean, what are my favorite things to do in the winter? I don't know. Just last week, I met a couple of friends at Sugar Beach to drink Great Lakes beer out at Sugar's Beach. Like I'm still living like it's June.
There you go. Have you lived in a colder city?
No, I've never. I've only lived in one city. I have no frame of reference for anything. That's the thing.
It's not a particularly cold city compared to Antarctica.
Joe's, okay. I have I've never had. This is the other thing. It was because my wife's from Edmonton, and
that's colder. Right?
Yeah,
Winnipeg.
Edmonton.
Yeah.
In Edmonton, we'll hear about like in October. Her family, because her parents live there, and we'll get reports. Her brother lives there. I don't know. They had 20 centimeters of snow, and it's like October. And then I'm always like, oh, that sucks.
Yeah. No, that's. I mean, I know the people in those places like make fun of us,
right?
For
what, we called the army
calling
that time?
in the army that one time, but also beyond that, like whatever you call that cold, that's not cold. There was
right.
There are all these people from Edmonton who I once insulted Edmonton in a column, like on purpose, because I was like, we're playing the dozens, right? Like we're doing Yo Mama jokes, like because the government of Alberta started putting ads in the TTC saying move to Alberta because Toronto's a crappy place to live. That was the gist of those ads.
Right.
So I started saying like the problem with the cheap housing prices in Edmonton is then you have to live in Edmonton. And I
Which
made
is
some
an
cracks
easy
about
joke, but you gotta
how
make it.
cold it was there and everything. And then these guys would be sending me weather reports like every week talking about how I had it all wrong, and yet then if it ever snows here and we complain that we got a lot of snow, people in Edmonton are like, "You call that snow? That's not snow."
You've been to Edmonton?
No.
Okay, well, I've been to Edmonton.
Well,
okay?
not since I was
like a kid.
infant. Yeah.
Okay, I don't know if that counts. But so I've been in Edmonton in the last decade. My brother-in-law got married, and I went to the wedding in Edmonton. And I mean, I don't want to get in trouble with my Edmonton listeners, okay? I've got a lot of Edmonton listeners who tune in for Toronto Mike. They hate listening to Toronto Mike here. But there's not much going on there. I was born and raised in this city, and there's always a lot of shit going on, despite what Elvis said on Festivus. And Edmonton was just kind of quiet and sleepy, and they had a kind of a cool... This is going to tie in nicely with something... actually, I'll bring it up now. But they had a street called White Road, I think. White Avenue? White Ave? It had white
Was that
in the name.
Christian Heritage Month Street?
12 months a year in Edmonton, okay? Christian Heritage Month, 12 months a year in Edmonton. That's another fun fact. But White Ave, I think it was. But it was kind of cool, and I said, I kind of dig the street. It's got some, 90s Queen Street vibes. This was my thought. But it's a very small, it's a couple of blocks in this fucking city, right? So now that I brought up 90s Queen Street, I'm wondering, did you read this article? And I didn't copy and paste
Today in the Star, I believe, about what happened to Queen Street, right?
Right, okay. So so I'm wondering for your thoughts on this, because it ties into a few other things I wanted to bring up.
Mm-hmm.
But essentially, it was talking about what happened. I want to get the right headline here. Yeah, Queen West used to be the heart of Toronto. How did it go so wrong? This is a Toronto Star article. We'll chat about this.
Yeah.
Then I have a couple other Toronto Star articles and then a few other topics. But I used to go to Queen Street all the time in the 90s. This was the cool place to go.
I worked on Queen Street. I spent a lot of time on Queen Street in both
You were
the 80s
modeling,
and the
right,
90s.
for some of
So
those.
here's what I want to say is about that, just as a preamble, just as an introduction. And this article is timed to the basically the old City TV building, which has been operated by CTV Bell Media.
299 Queen Street West.
299 Queen Street West. They've moved their TV operation out of there.
Right.
And so the building is kind of vacant now for the first time in decades, or it's not being used for television production anyway. And it's kind of whoa, what? And so I think that's the occasion for this article. But I want to say, and I like Mark Colley who wrote it, and I don't have any...
What's his last name? I'll go look it up. You keep talking and I'll find it.
So when I was a student at Toronto Metropolitan University, which was then called Ryerson, and I worked at the student newspaper, somebody wrote an op-ed
Mark
at
Colley.
the time. Mark Colley, yeah.
Colley, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Somebody wrote an op-ed for the Eye Opener must have been 1993, saying, what the hell happened to Queen Street? It used to be so cool, and now there's a Le Chateau and a Club Monaco, and it's
H&M.
it's like a mall now. It's not cool at all.
Right.
And guess what? People still continued finding it cool well into the 2000s, and I'm sure my 16-year-old daughter doesn't go there to hang out.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the epicenter the way it maybe used to be. But she still goes down there because some of the coolest shops are still on Queen Street, right? Like the places where you want to... They literally line up to go in and buy a sweatshirt. So, but, there's still some stuff there. And obviously the Cameron House and the Horseshoe are still there and whatnot. But it used to be the place, right? And I think over time... stuff moved west because it's following real estate prices.
Yeah, the Ossington maybe, and
out to the first. It was Queen West, and then up Ossington, Dundas, and whatnot. And I think that's just the nature of kind of how cities gentrify to some extent. But yeah, the Black Bull closing, which I think you and I talked about after I wrote about it.
Yeah,
that to me was one of those. Not even what happened to Queen West, but really okay, this is a milestone in the evolution of of this as an entertainment street, right? And certainly that 299 Queen West, the former site of Speaker's Corner and the former site of Electric Circus, and all that Much Music stuff, all that City TV stuff, all that more recently like CP24 stuff. I mean, it's weird to not have it there, right? But that's the way she goes.
That's the way the cookie crumbles.
I mean, I guess Ossington is that, and King West is kind of my higher end bar district now, and all of that. And I'm not really in that scene anymore, so I don't really know how vibrant things are. But like, that's my bigger concern is less like whether one neighborhood is trendier than another or is more happening than another. I do want to say goodbye to the treasured landmarks, but at the same time, like, my bigger concern is like if they're being replaced by something else. Do the people who want to go out and do all those things that we used to do on Queen Street West, do they have a place to go and do that now? Because, and this is something my friends and I have been talking about, like people in their 40s and 50s who used to be sort of like into the nightlife and the art scene and the like really into the Toronto, like the music scene, the visual art scene, the club scene and all of that. And some of these people just on social media, there's chatter just kind of about how, oh boy, aren't we getting old that we don't do that? But also I just miss the sense of community. But is, now that everybody's been forced by expensive rents either to move to Hamilton or somewhere else and disperse out all over the place, you don't have like everybody living in abandoned warehouses out in Parkdale anymore.
100%.
You don't have people, you don't have galleries renting cheap storefronts all along Queen West. You don't like the art scene community seems to have dissipated and lost a lot of energy just because nobody can afford
to live
the
in
rent.
the city, and the store, the cool boutique shops or whatever can't afford the rent. That's way higher proportionally. So you got all that going on. In the meantime, I always look back, what happened like from the 90s? Like, what is the big change? Oh yeah, the internet, right? So the internet, you could literally point to the internet. There's communities online now. Like literally, there's that same community is talking right now on Facebook or whatever, wherever the heck they're meeting.
Probably not Facebook. But
well,
no, that same community is. Yeah, the 40, 50-year-olds,
I noticed that there's definitely, the boomers are all on the Facebook, I've noticed, which is why my kids want nothing to do with it. But, okay, so they're all meeting online regardless. But there's another thing, too, that's worth noticing. Like we also, 299 Queen Street, I mean, no one more than this show celebrates 299 Queen Street. I had Retro Ontario on for a 40th anniversary of Much Music retrospective, and it was freaking amazing. That was just this past quarter, because Much Music turned 40. But there is no Much Music today. But at the time, if a big artist, a big musician were coming to town, they would make their way to 299 Queen. There would be close the street for, I don't know, Much Music Video Awards, and depends who was dropping by. You had Steve Anthony throwing the Christmas tree out of the window at 299. You had Speaker's Corner, as you mentioned. Like, you could watch things happening. Like, this was a big deal. But Much Music's been gone a very, very long time. Like, Much Music's been dead for a long time. So I think the internet killed Much Music, as it completely changed.
Streaming
everything.
of videos and music on demand.
Right.
Like,
so the internet is why this Queen West, which may have had this cooler vibe back in the 90s, for sure. But again, I had a cooler vibe in the 90s.
But like also like live music venues are struggling, and partly that's the internet as well. It's rents and all of that. But it's also like, this is the thing is that today's I was trying to explain to my kids, like teenagers, that in the olden days, like if you want to become a professional musician, like first you would like a rock star or whatever, you would like first, learn to play your instrument or write some songs or whatever. You get some friends, you form a band, you practice, but then you start booking gigs. And so at the El Macombo, it might be the Rolling Stones playing upstairs on a secret show, or it might be like the Hot British Band who's in town, that they signed. But downstairs, it'd be your friends from like geography class playing for like $2 cover.
This was big at Lee's Palace.
And this was everywhere. Lee's Palace, but there were like 35 bars on Queen West you could go to on any given night and see people in their like teenagers, but more so people in their 20s trying to form a band. And you're hoping that like somebody from a record label or some music critics, or like you build up a base of following. You'd have your little independent CD that you'd sell at Sam the Record Man or whatever.
Maybe, yeah,
yeah,
sure.
a little cassette like the Bare Naked Ladies with the little sandwich on the front and all of that.
Yellow tape.
But like, so you were gigging, right?
Yeah.
And so that was how you became famous. Is that as part of that scene, you got a record deal and developed your local fan base, and then you'd move up to the next level, and you get a radio airplay and all of that.
Right.
And now you don't do that. You're right. You record your music. The Weeknd in Toronto has produced very few bigger stars than The Weeknd.
Right.
He was famous before he ever played a single live show. Right. He created his music at home. He released it like mysteriously online, found an audience for it there, and then got his record deal that way. And that's like Shawn Mendes from the greater Toronto area, like was a Vine star, right? He put music in little short videos on the Vine social media network. Like people on TikTok, on YouTube, on Spot, like you just release your own music.
Well, even Justin Bieber was like a YouTube guy before
guy,
Usher got a whole Usher.
But what I'm saying is that the like live music element of it, the basement of our like nightlife ecosystem was that like people like was that the live music would be like a cornerstone, and all the people who were trying to become famous, the people who were famous, the people who would never become famous, the people just having fun, like they'd be out gigging because that was like what the whole music industry was based on. That's all transformed. Like the industry is no longer based on that, right? If anything, your live performances are a way to earn money later, but it's because you sell out stadiums and you know,
Rogers Stadium at Downsview Park.
Yeah, for example,
to be discussed. So I thought I wanted to shout out the article because it's one of those conversation starters, like you know, where you can talk about, you know, the rents went up, the for both the people and for the businesses. The internet showed up. Clubbing changed. I mean, I don't think clubs in the 90s, clubs were a big deal, right? Mm-hmm. My kids aren't really, I don't know. My daughter in Montreal goes to some kind of club type places.
Fafun Electrique.
Yes, exactly.
It's still there, baby.
Okay, so she's doing that or whatever. Although she's going to be here tonight to watch Wicked with Morgan. That's the plan tonight. Michelle's going to drop by and watch Wicked with Morgan. But okay, so quick question, one more before we say goodbye to this article from the Toronto Star, and then I have a
I got one more thing to say before we say goodbye to it.
My last thing that you do right after this, which is that. You know, CP24 is now broadcasting out of Agincourt. This is a fact. Okay. They're all, I think the radio's on their way out because I don't know, they were like next door, and the radio guys, I think 1010. You ever heard of the station 1010? I think they're going to be moving out to Agincourt. I think it's all like.
Are they really?
I think so.
Is it on Channel 9 Court there or whatever?
In Scarborough.
Like the old CTV building.
That's the building, yeah. So they're going to be there somewhere, I think. I don't know if John Moore likes that or not, but he's going to have no say in that matter, I don't think. But the truck is still there. So you remember the...
Yeah, I think that was protected by a heritage thing or something.
So I was reading, it was suggested, though, that the truck might stay.
Yeah, I think it is.
But if Bell Media vacates, the truck... I'm just here to say that when that truck was put up there, it said,
used to say Live Eye, City TV, City
It said City Pulse.
Yeah, City Pulse.
Okay, City Pulse. Which, of course, they don't use it anymore. Rogers owns it, I'm sure, but they don't use it anymore. But City Pulse became City News. But, of course, City Pulse. And then when I guess, CTV, Globe Media, the whole whatever, whenever it ended up in Bell's hands at some point, they repainted it, okay? So it's no longer City Pulse, which is a Rogers brand. It's CP24. So shouldn't we change it back?
Yeah. If it's protected by if it's a heritage truck, you would think that the heritage colors and
the OG paint
scheme,
job.
it should say like City Pulse everywhere.
Yeah, like it did when it first.
And it should have the voice of Mark Daly coming out of it 24 hours
100%.
All I was gonna say, and this is tied into the move out to Agincourt, feeling like and you know, I did a lot of broadcasting at 1010. I have done a lot of appearances at CP24's studio there. And all of that, and I do think I like Agincourt, but I have been to that studio in Agincourt as well, and it's in a like industrial mall, right? Like it's back hidden away, and I do feel like even when you're doing radio, like having the windows that you can look out your downtown, you're in the heart of the city, your guests can come by in the morning, and John Moore Less so since the Zoom era began, but used to be like all those panelists would show up in person every day for their little 15-minute slot. And it's like you've got this, like you're in the heart of it. And I feel like if you're in a suburban industrial mall, you lose that. And this is what my one point that I wanted to say was that I think Moses Znaimer has done a lot of things, and he's been a very influential guy in television and Canadian media in general for a lot of different reasons, right? There are a lot of things he was innovative in back in the old Channel 57 on UHF days, and then, launching Much Music Here, which was, it's not like MTV didn't exist. It's not like he invented Much Music, but like a lot of the stuff they did and the way that they did it became standard across North America, including, those CP24 adopted them, but the City Pulse, videographer, the reporter who carries his own camera
Dominic
and shoots himself
Shulo.
in the window and stuff. But in terms of like the city of Toronto, the way they built that studio so that the windows opened up onto the street and that their newscasts and their VJ spots for both Much Music and City TV back in the day, all their live talk shows and stuff would all have people on the street could see it happening there. And then Speaker's Corner was part of that because it's like this little video machine there that you
Pop
put a
in a
dollar
loony
in,
and you had
you
your
get to
say.
say your bit, and it's like there was no YouTube, so you just put it in there and hope the producers would put it in their weekend show, and that was your way to have your say. But I feel like as a contribution to the city, that buying 299 Queen and then structuring it that way, like so that all of our local media coverage was happening where we can see it and they could see us in the background and all of that, like huge in terms of the long-term contribution to the city, and maybe more significant to me as a Toronto guy than any of the other things Moses Znaimer did in media that may or may not be influential to other people. And to the extent that that building is going to move on to a different life that does something different, I think that's a real chapter in the city's history that maybe, as you say, technology and the march of time have made a lot of that redundant and it wouldn't work anymore. It's not working anymore. Like maybe it's just time to move on, but it was like, man, that was a very significant place for a long era in this city. And we have Moses to thank for that initially, but it is kind of sad to see the passing of it. Or to note that it's already passed.
The city was their newsroom, as Moses would say. And here is the voice.
The following program contains adult themes, nudity, and coarse language. Viewer and parental discretion is advised.
Yeah, baby. When I'm like 12 years old, that's what I'm looking for on a Friday night.
Because you're going to watch Porky's.
Yeah, you darn right. Yeah.
All right, my friend. Okay, I have a few gifts for you, Ed, and then I want to tell you about a conversation I had last week with my city councilor, Amber Morley. So I have in my freezer right now a Palma Pasta large lasagna. That's going home with you.
All right.
I know that's why you're here.
Be well received in my household.
Oh, and before I give you the next gift, because we talked about the City Pulse truck, and I want it back to its, what do you call that, livery? That's called livery, I think.
Oh, right,
the way the paint job or whatever, livery. Okay, so restore that truck back to its original livery if it's going to stick around at 299 Queen Street. Quickly, though, Honest Ed's, that's Bathurst and Bloor, so we're off Queen Street for this one. But 7 years later, the sign is in pieces in a warehouse in Aurelia. And although official Toronto historian of the Toronto Mike podcast, Jeremy Hopkin, tells me he had a conversation this past summer with Jacob Mervish, and he was assured that one of the two large Honest Ed signs was still being restored, but that was the plan. I'm just saying, don't take your eye off this. If we give a shit, and Toronto loves its freaking signs, right? These signs we're way past the COVID pandemic right now, and we haven't seen these signs, so I don't know what the plan is.
My understanding is that Honest Ed sign, one of the two big ones, is not going back up at Bloor and Bathurst where Honest Ed's used to be. It's going to go on the back of the Ed Mervish Theatre, the Ed Purvish CAA Theater, whatever it's called, the old Pantages Theater, which is right near Yonge and Dundas. So the back of it on Victoria Street, which sort of like you can see sideways from Yonge Dundas Square. It's an appropriate place for a tribute to Honest Ed's. His family owns the building. Yeah. He helped revive it back. The theater scene is big. It's, so it's good. But yeah, let's get on with it. It's been 7 years.
Several
What the heck are you doing?
So just making sure, that's why we're here, Ed. We don't forget these things. We keep
That's right.
people hold their feet to the fire. Okay, speaking of holding feet to the fire, I invited my counselor, Amber Morley, on because here in South Etobicoke, her ward includes the bluer bike lane that you get in the South Etobicoke.
That's right.
Okay.
Very controversial.
So I wanted Amber Morley. I wanted to talk a little bit about 212. Now, if you can do, I don't know if it's possible. We don't want to spend too much time on this. I don't want to upset Alan Zweig, but we do need to discuss 212 in particular. What it's already passed. This is a provincial legislation that we can say goodbye at some point. Maybe when. Two parts of this bluer bike lane, and then the university and young bike lanes. And I use these on the reg. I'm very interested in what's going on with the passing of Bill 212.
All right, so I think maybe we were talking about this as a proposed piece of legislation the last time I was here.
100%.
But basically this says that if a bike lane is going to be installed on a street that it's going to take away a lane of car traffic, then the province gets to say whether or not it's allowed. And then specifically the province is going to take out sections of the Bloor Street bike lanes, the University Avenue bike lanes, and Yonge Street bike lanes, because the Premier has particular beef with those ones. In Toronto, University, because I think some of his cabinet ministers drive up in there from Brampton and stuff, and so they don't like driving there. But Bloor Street, because they have been very controversial out here. So I had heard that the western section of Bloor, so this is like a thing where there's negotiations taking place between the city and the province and within the provincial government of like what it's worth doing, especially because part of this whole bill is an election stunt for the provincial government.
Is the conversations between our civil servants who are experts in these things, or is it with politicians?
Well, the politicians are ultimately making the call, but they are talking to the civil servants. And part of it's about logistics, but part of it is also a political decision that they're making about how much, man, I was going to use that, how much juice you get from the squeeze. Like everybody's saying that now, and it annoyed me the very first time I heard it, and it still annoys me. But that concept is how much value are we going to get for the controversy of this, right? And so how much should we remove? I think the section of the Bloor West bike lanes west of Jane Street, that's phase one. That is coming out. It's a matter of when. And there is some activists filed a lawsuit to try and prevent this from happening, and that may have delayed it, because otherwise they may have come out before Christmas is what I heard. But there's still some talk about it. Now, the section of the Bloor bike lanes that runs, say, through the annex into downtown, it's not clear that those are going to be whether those are going to be removed or not. They may be safe because they're popular with the people who live near there, and they're not nearly so controversial. I don't think there's any justification to take out the University Avenue ones. Honestly, when you go down there and just watch, they are not causing any traffic. They are well used by cyclists, and University is congested, like it's a downtown street, but it's not worse than the surrounding streets. But also, it's not gridlocked. And this is the thing, is you're at a red light. When you're looking across, you just got clear road. So it's the red light holding you up.
Right.
And then when it turns green, you and the other drivers move until you get to the next red light. There's nothing that an additional lane of car traffic is going to get you any faster, right? But I don't think they actually care about that. I think they think they're very visible. They're downtown.
That's a key thing.
You got all these doctors and nurses riding to the hospital in them. What kind of image is that projecting? What are they, small children? Are doctors? Are they they're on kids' toys out there?
But this point you're making, very humorously, that they don't actually care about reports or studies or any kind of science-based analytics or evidence or such. Because and I wrote this down here, and I didn't write it. I copied and pasted it, but I can't remember who wrote it. But downtown Toronto, this is regarding Doug Ford. Downtown Toronto is a lost cause for him. Alienating Torontonians doesn't hurt him. It's the 905 vote that he wants to shore up. Pounding away at bike lanes is a sure win for him, and it distracts from what should be larger provincial issues like healthcare, housing, the environment, transit, etc. I think that's a pretty good summary of where we're at. Where he's
You
just
wrote down that quote. Is it
Yeah.
from me?
Is it? Is it for you?
I wrote
you.
a column
No,
that's the
no.
thesis of. So
Okay.
those may not actually
It might
be my
you,
words.
because I
but
put it
that's
into my Ed Keenan
the-
section, but I didn't like attribute it. So
That's
maybe I thought
the
I would
gist
know it was you.
of something I wrote, but I don't know that that's exactly my thing.
Well,
But
that's you.
I
then.
do think that yeah, Doug Ford. It's like
Well written, Ed.
It's like Donald Trump and the border wall and all of that too. It doesn't matter if it's feasible, right? And it is a feature, not a bug, that it pisses off people downtown, right? Like Donald Trump thinks that among the voters he cares about, an election fought, or in which like you and me and other downtown Toronto people, like with bike helmets on, wearing spandex, go out and call him a fascist. That's good for him, right? Because his voters think like that's a plus, right?
I don't own any spandex. I just want the
neither
listenership
do
to
I,
know
but
that.
you know, But this is if you got a
Right.
bike helmet on.
it's a
There's
feature,
a certain
not
number of
bug.
people who see spandex whether you're wearing it or
Right,
not. But yeah, it's a feature, not a bug. Like it's actually the standard traditional wedge politics is that if you're enraging the people who will never vote for you,
Right.
that often is a good thing.
Red
because
meat for your base.
it's rallying the rest of them to your side, right?
right.
But yeah, there are like what I wonder is like if I lived outside of Toronto, I mean, I've spent way too much time at St. Michael's Hospital and Michael Garron Hospital recently with my parents and whatnot. It's not like the emergency rooms in Toronto are like smooth sailing, but my understanding is that hospitals in the rest of Ontario outside the city of Toronto, like the amount of hallway medicine, the waits for a room, the delays, like if you live in one of those places that does vote for Doug Ford and that hates Toronto cyclists, like on principle, like why is it good for you that we're talking about this instead of
Right.
talking about the hospital system? Like,
Right.
and I mean, I just don't know how you, it's one of those things where like, you don't want to take the bait so that his wedge politics pays off, but you don't want to just roll over either, right? Like there are things worth defending that we have to defend, but is there a way to like keep the eye on the prize and look at like the province has big issues that it could be solving, and this is not one of them.
Right. And then we could fold into this brief segment here, well, as brief as you want it to be. Since your visit, there was a scathing report on Ontario Place and what's happening there.
Yeah. Are you talking about the Auditor General's
Yes,
report?
right.
Yeah. So, I mean, yeah. So as it turns out, the process by which they decided what to do with Ontario Place and who to award the contract to was not a great process. And people can look that up, the Auditor General's report, and say that, you know, it was conducted in many ways improperly. But quite beyond that, too, the whole moving the science center there, like this is now going to be more expensive for the province than they thought it was going to be, first of all. And like allowing Thermahe to build there is going to cost the province like $1 billion or like hundreds of millions of dollars, right? Way more than estimated, like multiples more than estimated. And part of that is that the cost of retrofitting like some of those old features of Ontario Place to be the new Ontario Science Center, inadequate though it will be as a science center, is going to be radically more expensive than just fixing the old science center would be, right? This is like one thing that really jumped out to me on that is that like the whole justification for moving the science center away from the still under construction Ontario Science Center subway station and moving it down to Ontario Place is that we can't afford to restore the old building. But guess what? The new building is going to cost more than restoring the old building was going to cost.
Of course. Of course. And in the meantime, as you know, you're in South Etobicoke right now. So I have made a visit in the past month to Sherway Gardens. Kids ate free at Italy. This is not an endorsement because I only ate Palma pasta. Yeah. So we had to go enjoy this kids eating free at Italy. People think I'm saying Italy, but I'm actually saying Italy. But I've said too much because Palma pasta is what we prefer. Of course. But of course, there's the Science Center's like, I just saw it there and I was like, oh, like as a joke, I went on Blue Sky months ago and I made a joke that the Ontario Science Center would end up like as a kiosk in the Cloverdale Mall. That was like my joke.
Close.
Really close. It's kiosk-esque in the part of the Sherway Gardens that's the least traveled in my experience of that mall. But anyway,
I haven't gone out and seen it yet, but
well, it's just kind of a hokey little thing.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
know.
a little display there, right?
So there you
but
go.
It's not like the actual Science Center is like on the move here on display. It's like they could have done these mall kiosk displays at any time that they wanted to, right? Like it's like
Oh, and J-Ho says, with the rain and snow that's fallen on it, he just wants to point out that the roof has not collapsed. But okay, it may needed repairs, but there were a number of people raised their hands in places that said, we will pay for the reparations and fix it. It was clear that the government wanted an excuse, if you will, to shut down the Ontario Science Centre and move it to Ontario Place, possibly allegedly because they need to help justify the costs at Ontario Place.
I think a big part of wanting to move the Science Centre down there is part of the Ontario Place revitalization.
Right.
It's not as much about whether the old Science Center is like neither here nor there. But yeah, it is a big ship. Like when you have an old building, it needs to be repaired. You need constant work. There's like a life cycle cost.
Sure.
But it's so seldom is it going to be cheaper to erect an entirely new building or even more expensive, retrofit like another equally old building to a new purpose.
When the George Bell Arena had roof issues, no one discussed we're going to build a new arena in the neighborhood. And demolish this thing. The roof is in trouble here. They fixed it.
Yeah. They didn't fix it yet, but they are going to fix it.
I don't know, because now I'm a Mimico Arena man, but it will be fixed. Mark my words here. Okay, so we have, again, we could spend a lot of...
I mean, it's back open now and it's certified safe, but there's still a big new roof installation coming soon.
Well, I know it's open because my buddy Murray was playing there the other day, so shout out to Murray, my plumber. But okay, so we have the Ontario Place, which the Science Center, we got now Bill 212. I feel I need to move off this, but on my way out, I'll just let you know, because I started this sentence about 45 minutes ago. I have fresh craft beer for you, Ed Keenan, from Great Lakes Brewery. Great Lakes Brewery. I just want to say shout out to Great Lakes Brewery, the first sponsor this podcast ever had. All they do is renew. They host us a couple of times a year. We don't only have an event now at the brewery, which is in South Etobicoke, and it's tough for me to say brewery, but we also have an event at the GLB Brew Pub, which is at Jarvis and Queens Quay, which, by the way, reminds me, because I was going to ask you for a Toronto Star update. I'll do it right now. But okay, so Measuring Tape also from Ridley Funeral Home, Pillars of the Community. Life's Undertaken is their podcast. Can I get a quick update here before this time gets away from us? How are things at the Toronto Star? But in particular, I'm wondering about podcasting at the Toronto Star. Do you have anything you can announce or tease?
I have no update at this time.
So is there nothing you can even tease?
I anticipate... Well, here I will tease
more of your
next
voice.
Minute to Toronto Mic'd. In 3 months, I expect we'll be able to talk about news then, or
you heard it here first.
Things
everybody.
that have evolved since then.
So things are moving. Nothing you can say publicly.
They're moving, but not at a stage yet where
not at TMDS pace, where we decide at 11 o'clock we have an idea and we launch it at 2.
This Matters was on a long hiatus. That is a podcast that I used to be one of the hosts of, and it sort of went on a long hiatus while we made some different plans. And now I have periodically brought it out of hiatus for some special episodes since that, one or two over the last month or so. And, I may do that again over the next few weeks, but then I expect that in the near-ish future, a more permanent plan for a podcast that I'll be involved in will be announced. But I don't have any specifics to talk about yet.
Whoa.
Honestly, because
but in 3
things
months
are still in the work and still up in the air a bit, and it's like is all moving in the right place, but there's a few different ways we might go, and it's just now in the new year to make the decision and just start planning it.
Well, you know me, I got to ask these questions.
Yeah.
Because
No, I appreciate
since
it.
your last visit, and I won't name names here, but somebody that's involved, heavily involved with Toronto Star podcasting, like sent me a nice note, like an email, and we went back and forth. And he's like, "Hey, would you meet me for like a drink or whatever?" And then we literally, it was in my calendar to be at the GLB Brew Pub for a beer with this individual, and it was very interesting. I guess we're gonna pick each other's brain on some things or whatever, and I'm all set for it. And this individual needed to cancel, but it never got back in my calendar. So this was something that almost happened. So I have nothing to report either, except that maybe in 2025 this person will reach out
back
again
out
and we'll meet for that beer at GLB Brew Pub.
and see if anything comes of that.
And
or
then
if
I'll have
any
something to
shared
maybe we'll all
yeah.
talk about this in 3 months here. Okay, so that'll be very interesting. Andrew Ward, who's on the live stream, he wanted the Macho Man impression,
That's
which
right.
you gave him.
Oh yeah.
He has another update on Big Daddy Siki here. I want
Okay,
to pull
great.
this up. He says that it was Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling that Sweet
Was
Daddy
the
was
promotion
on.
that he
So
was
for
with,
guys
yeah.
like you and I, we're like, what the hell's that? Like, I actually don't know what that is, except it sounds impressive. So Atlantic Grand Prix Wrestling was where you'd find Sweet Daddy.
All right.
And he shouts out, back to the Toronto Star, of course, because I got Ed Keenan here in the basement. Norm DaCosta would write pieces about this for the Toronto Star.
Excellent.
Norm DaCosta. So there you go. Recycle my electronics. Ed, you know this, but if you have old cables, old devices, old electronics, TVs, printers, whatever the heck is going on there, you don't throw that in the garbage because the chemicals end up in our landfill. You go to recyclemyelectronics.ca. Put in your postal code and find out where you can drop it off to be properly recycled. You got it, Ed?
I got it.
Another note from Andrew Ward, but this was sent a while ago, and then things have rapidly changed since he sent this in here.
Just
At
during
time,
the
he
course of this podcast?
No, it's, well, in the course of the past quarter, because it's every
okay,
quarter you drop
okay.
by. He goes, he actually requested the Macho Man impression months ago, but then he says, how in the name of F, he said the F word, Ed. I won't repeat it now. Who knows who's listening at home? How in the name of F, and again, he wrote this months ago, does Metrolink's chair, Phil Verster, still have a job? So that's what he wrote. And on that front, there is news from the last quarter regarding Metrolink's CEO.
Yeah. Well, he does still have a job. It's just somewhere else. He resigned from Metrolinx to go take another job. So he's leaving on his own terms, but
He was not fired.
certainly didn't get the projects built. Like Metrolinx runs the Go system, but it was created basically to build these large-scale transit projects in the Greater Toronto area, and it has been a comprehensive failure at that. I'm trying to remember as I speak here. It built the UP Express. Bing, success. I'm trying to remember if there's another one they've opened. I can't think of one off the top of my head. I mean, they have done a few new GO stations. They've been slowly electrifying some of the lines to increase service. But you look at the large-scale LRT projects that were begun 12, 15 years ago. You've got the Eglinton Crosstown. Still waiting to find out if and when it's ever going to open.
Anything new since the last
Sometime
time?
this year, we expect the TTC has it budgeted to open in June but they clarified that they don't have inside information. They just need to have money in their budget to start operating it once it opens. So they picked June as a likely potential possible date. Finch West, now in the same limbo. In Mississauga, the Huron-Ontario LRT, also in the same limbo, right? It's just like my understanding of this is that this is like not Doug Ford is the bad guy. This is like Dalton McGuinty's Liberals created Metrolinx and oversaw the start of all of this. But the Infrastructure Ontario model behind it, which the Auditor General, in addition to Ontario Place, had a lot to say about Infrastructure Ontario and how their procurement has been going and how disastrously these construction projects often work out in terms of their timing or their budget or both. And it just seems like the whole premise of this kind of like public-private partnerships in the way that Metrolinx and Infrastructure Ontario have pursued them is a disaster that can't get anything built on time, seldom gets it built on budget, creates all kinds of problems. And so there were problems with the older model where the government ran its own construction projects, like the TTC oversaw its own construction.
Right.
There were problems with that, and things would go over budget and over time, but not to this scale. And even if it did happen to this scale, we had something we could do. We could fire the people responsible directly because that's the politicians, right? Now we don't have that. And so anyhow, Phil Verster has moved on, and we'll have some other new Metrolinx CEO.
Michael Lindsay.
Well, Michael Lindsay is at least the interim head now, at least. He's supposed to be pushing the crosstown overhead. He has been the president of Infrastructure Ontario for the last few years.
So he's the guy who shut down the Ontario Science Center. Is that what I'm hearing there?
That's the guy.
Right.
Well, or he's the guy who was overseeing the construction of the new one.
Okay.
Yeah.
The sudden closure. Okay. So so Michael Lindsay is, did you say interim, or is he he's the new?
My
Metrolinx
understanding
CEO?
was he was appointed in an interim basis.
Well, he's lucky, I think, like to follow like the guy
to try and push the Eglinton crosstown over the finish line. While I imagine they're seeking a new permanent head. Now, it may turn out that he winds up being the permanent head, but I'm not sure that heading up Metrolinx is a promotion from heading up Infrastructure Ontario. I think he may like that's where I don't have insider information, but my understanding when he was appointed was that he was going to immediately be overseeing this in the short term while they find a new CEO in the long term.
Okay. Okay, so he's got a low bar there. I think it's good. What do they say? Overachieve, under promise, overachieve, or whatever. Like I feel like a low bar there. He can show some success.
Well, they solved that. Rick Leary solved that by just stop promising anything.
Right. That's right.
You start the construction projects, but just don't make any claims about when they're going to be done.
No dates to open.
Yeah.
Right. Here's a team. So Toronto's got a new, and I'm going to ask you in a moment about the Toronto Scepters, our PWHL team. But the WNBA team has a name, and I'm curious for your thoughts on the name Toronto Tempo.
It's all right.
You don't think of that Ford car that we all grew up with, the Tempo?
Well, now I do. No, I mean it.
Not to be confused with the Topaz, as I recall, these Ford cars of the 80s.
Topaz, I was just considering that as a name for a Toronto basketball team, too. So
they should rename the hockey team to Topaz.
I think Toronto Tempo would be okay. I mean, I think my personal weird, it's like a personal preference, but I like things that are like I'm less of a fan of abstract concepts as a name for your team. So like the Utah Jazz
or the Magic,
the Ottawa Charge, or the Orlando Magic, or the Toronto Tempo.
Right.
I like I mean, the Leafs is a weird one because a Leaf is a strange thing to name your team after, but still like the Leafs or the Canadiens or the Yankees or the Red Sox.
The Jets.
Like these are a thing.
Right.
And the plural has an S on it, right?
Well,
so
Rob Del Mundo, who covers hockey, he agrees 100. He was by, I think he's a big PWHL supporter, and then we were talking about the Tempo, and he agrees with you 100%.
Yeah, but I don't hate it, the sound of it, and I'm pretty sure that it's going to age well as a name. Like it's going to feel like those teams we were just naming, like the Magic or whatever. That's going to come to define the team. And
like the Raptors, right?
Yeah,
we all hate, I think most of us
Raptors was ridiculous when they named it, but then it becomes less ridiculous the further we get from Jurassic Park and Barney the Dinosaur being the pop culture elements of the moment.
No, absolutely. I was at a Raptor game recently, and they broke the quarters into decades. So like the first quarter was the 90s, right? So you had a lot of like Damon Stoudemire and stuff they were celebrating, and then they did the 2000s, and then they did the 2010s, and then, which is of course that's the decade we actually won the championship, and then the fourth quarter was the 2020s, and I thought that was kind of interesting how they broke that down. Now okay, so the Toronto Tempo, how are the Toronto Scepters doing?
Well, they're having a rough go of it to start the season here. They only have 2 wins in their first 7 games.
Oh.
But it's an interesting. I mean, so Natalie Spooner has been out injured all season.
Oh.
I understand she skated with the team for the first time, like within the past week, and that she feels like her recovery's on track. But there's been no time or date given for when she's coming back. She had like ACL surgery after having her knee injured in the playoffs last year. And that is after like one of the most dominant seasons any Toronto athlete has ever had in any pro sport, right? Like not just leading the league in goals and dragging her team to first place, but like she scored more goals. Like her the margin by which she led the scoring race proportionally was as high as Austin Matthews scoring 70 goals in the NHL. Like she scored like more than double as many goals as anybody else in the league, right? It's like she was just a dominant player.
This is like when Babe Ruth was hitting like 27 homers and the rest of the league was hitting like 21 homers. Like there's
or like the size of the gap. And so Toronto really misses her. And in particular because like we haven't had a lot of other shooters on the team, the Toronto Raptors. And so the game against Ottawa the other day was a good example where they outshot their opponents 36-13 and lost 3-1, right? And so they need some finishers. Like I just started to notice, and maybe this is too granular for like this kind of podcast, but they're dominating like possession. And they're getting a lot of shots, but a lot of their shots are like wristers from the point. You ever watch the Toronto Maple Leafs power play, and you're like, how after a minute and a half of passing it back and forth and up and around, do we wind up with Morgan Riley as the shooter? And why is he taking a wobbly little wrist shot? Why? And I feel like a lot of Toronto Raptors plays wind up with that same wobbly little wrist shot. Often they're making one too many passes. I counted in one game the other day like probably 5 times that they whiffed on one-timers, like just bobbled the puck. So, but
they need finishers.
Still
they
playing well, and they did make a big trade just within the past week. Jocelyn Larocque, who was the first player Toronto ever drafted, is the oldest player in the league, was a number 1 defender for the Leafs. She went to Ottawa alongside Victoria Park, who was more of a fourth line forward for us. And in return, we're getting 2 players, a defender and a forward, who are sort of younger. The defender, forgive me, I just
it's okay.
encountered her the other day. I'm trying to remember her name.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember her name because it's just slipping out of me. But she's subbed right in at the first line. She's more of an offensive defenseman, and she, alongside Renata Fast, is probably our first pair right now, and she looks really solid. And Skamura, who is the forward, hasn't scored a lot with Ottawa this year, but is like maybe more of a scoring threat than Victoria Bach is. Maybe has some finish.
I have names for you, by the way.
Both of them on Team USA. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so the defender is Savannah Harmon.
Harmon, right, yes.
And the power forward is Haley Skamura.
Yeah,
right.
So that's what I think. I think they're just shifting some things up. We got a different style of defender here who can maybe quarterback a power play. And we've got somebody who can be a forward on the top 2 lines and maybe has some potential finish. And, but I think the coach, Troy Ryan, too, just has to make things work, like come up with a system. Like Jamie Watts, who has been a pleasure to watch on this team. She led Ottawa in scoring last year before signing with the Raptors in the offseason.
You almost said the Leafs.
She scored a couple goals this year.
Yeah.
But she was like a dominant scorer with Ottawa last year, and she's such a dynamic player to watch. She almost she has some of that Mitch Marner, not in that she's a big passer, although she does pass the puck, but she's a good shooter as well. But watching her sort of dance, like how she goes around people, the way she dangles back and forth, like it's kind of got flashes of that there. And then I think with like Emma Maltese, who was like a powerful part of the team last year and continues to be this year, and Sarah Nurse. Like, they should be able to figure out how to put the puck in the net, right? And Hannah Miller.
Yeah.
And so I just hope they start to be able to do that soon, because they're still a fun team to watch. But last year they got off to a rough start, and then they won 11 in a row and placed first overall, right? So
Healthy Spooner, though.
So, yeah.
So we'll see. We'll get another big, thorough update from Ed Keenan in 3 months' time, because I learn all my Scepters news from you. Okay, home stretch here. Are you okay? We got like 10, 15.
Yeah.
Okay, you're rocking and
I'm
rolling.
in good
Because
shape.
I am assigning you homework, which is that you're going to listen to the Amber Morley episode of Toronto Mike. I just think it'd be...
Oh, boy, okay.
So she was only here, it was like December 2024. And we talked for like an hour, and you should listen. So
Did you talk about that bike lanes?
Yeah, we
Did
talked
she
about...
say she's going to barricade? She's going to solve it?
We're gonna chain ourselves to something.
All
We're gonna
right.
find something to chain ourselves to. But I want you to listen to that and then let me know your thoughts. And speaking of that episode, in that episode, I once again told Amber Morley how desperately I'd like to be able to bike to the island, the Toronto Island. Like, this is the thing. So, and I think it was since your last appearance.
So you want a bridge or a tunnel?
I want a bridge or
Yeah.
a tunnel. Like, yeah, at a bridge. And I think you wrote a piece about that Toronto ferry crash that injured 20 people, and that it could have been much, much worse. And we need to shore up that ferry service anyways, but we need to add a bridge. What say you, Ed Keenan?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, I think we should have some kind of fixed link there where pedestrians and cyclists can easily get over there. It's ridiculous that our ferries, first of all, are so old and have such little capacity, and it's ridiculous that it's taking years and years to replace them. But in addition to that, I just think it's ridiculous that we just don't have some way to walk or bike or get emergency vehicles over there that doesn't involve these 100-year-old ferries, right? And especially given how short the gaps are on both the east and west side. Now, there is a tunnel that allows you to walk over to the island right now, but only to the island airport, right?
Yes.
You can easily walk underground to the island airport, but because of the security of the runway and all of that, you would have to walk across the runway to get to the other part of, like, even if they would open the fence and let you out onto Hanlon's Point Island, it's not viable there. So unless they close the airport, which they're not doing. But it does seem like on the east end, there should be an easy enough way to build a bridge or a tunnel. However, every time I suggest it or anybody else suggests it, I hear from lots of people who say it's going to be much more logistically difficult than you think, because the bridge either would have to be like raised and lowered every 10 minutes or
every
whatever.
10 minutes. Okay.
Or else it would have to be like astoundingly high. And yeah, now I've seen proposals for a floating bridge. I've seen other things, but I just think, like, it makes so much sense to me that it would just and we should just make it happen. Like, or at least what the city's doing now, I understand at least, and maybe Amber Morley talked about this, is like at least getting a report on it as an option.
She mentioned that.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's fine for people to say, oh, this is not feasible, but I'd like some, like, expert opinion on how unfeasible it is. Like, what would it cost? What would be involved? Because then we're looking at a thing where we say, okay, it's not going to be easy, but it would cost X amount, and this is what it would look like. Now we're making a decision on whether it's worth it or not, right? That's a debate we can actually have.
Right.
Versus, whoa, too hard. Like, in what way? Right? And, like, what exactly are... So I'm glad we're getting that report. In principle, it seems to me like we're long overdue to have that. And in general, whether it's a fixed link, a bridge, a tunnel, or something else, the islands should be far more accessible to people. And, like, anybody, if you go to New York City as a tourist, people will tell you what you should do instead of taking the ferry to the Statue of Liberty, to Liberty Island, where you pay a lot to go on the ferry, and it's like a tourist trappy thing. And then your view from the base of the Statue of Liberty is like you're not really seeing much of the statue. Instead, get on the Staten Island ferry, which is free, and it takes you across to Staten Island. It's a commuter ferry. It's not. Its primary purpose is not tourists like me riding on it. But then you drive right past the Statue of Liberty and have the best view of it. Get great pictures from right up close on the way to Staten Island. Then you can have a Shake Shack burger and get back on the next ferry back to Manhattan. You have got these great views of Manhattan, of Battery Park, like Lower Manhattan from the water, and so it's actually great. But if you've ever taken that, you realize oh, this is a different class of vessel than what we call a ferry in Toronto. Like this is like a giant boat that fits thousands of people on it. They walk on one side, they walk on the off the other side. Like it's the size of like an apartment building,
right?
And it comes every 10 minutes or something, and then you just walk on and you go over and walk off, and then when we're replacing our ferries to because they're way over capacity and people have to line up for hours and hours, why don't we get something big like that? Why don't we get something that's so fast to load like that?
And my bridge.
And how come the ferry for commuters who are going to and from work in New York City can be free,
right?
And our ferries to the islands are not free? I don't.
Right.
Yeah. Anyhow.
Well, I have a kayak now, Ed, so I'm going to be kayaking to that island. Okay. So,
I do find the old ferries we have charming to ride on. There is an old-timey kind of it makes it an event. Right. But I don't think that overwhelms all the other...
Well, here's a fun fact. You might know this, of course, because you're a learned individual, Mr. Keenan. But J-Ho says the islands used to be a fixed link, a spit, until a big storm separated it in the late 1800s. So we were just kids back then, so we don't quite remember. But that's a fun fact for you, okay?
Yeah, ways before my time, but it is true that you used to be able to walk over there.
Right, and he also reminds us, and we've mentioned this in the past, but the late Raymond Moriyama, who we spoke about when he passed away, but he did build that science center to last 200 years. So
that was his plan, yeah, and he said, and his architecture firm has repeated, that they think it there's no reason it shouldn't last 200 years or 1,000 years if it's properly maintained, right?
But again, there's no room for this sensible logic in this administration. Yeah. Okay, so, and Moose Grumpy, because we were talking about Metrolinx, Moose Grumpy, who lives in Mississauga, says that the Mississauga LRT has become a lingering joke. So I guess that'll replace the Eglinton Crosstown or whatever.
That's that here, Ontario one, and it is now in the same category of garbage fire as the Crosstown.
Speaking of garbage fires, there was a picture that was taken yesterday of a cyber truck on somebody had explosives in the cyber trunk outside of Trump Tower. Did you know those cyber trucks they lock when they're on fire or an explosion? They actually lock. This seems like a bad idea to me.
This is a problem that's been with Teslas in particular, I understand, and so there's software that operates
it's
the
computer.
door locks,
right.
And so when they lose power or the software malfunctions, you can no longer unlock the doors. And from what I've heard, and I am not an expert in this, but I was reading about it in the case of another fire where bystanders were trying to rescue somebody who was trapped in their burning vehicle here in Toronto.
Right.
That there is a manual override, but it's not easy. It's not like a handle in the door like you and I might have in our car where you just pull the handle.
Inside the trunk. If you're locked in the trunk, you can...
Yeah. But in this case, you have to sort of remove a panel and reach in and pull a lever. It's not intuitive. It's the sleek design of this means that that's hidden away and you would have to know in advance and you'd have to have the wherewithal in an emergency to remember it and find it. So it does seem like this is a significant shortcoming. Apparently, it's supposed to unlock in those cases. I think, because I'm not looking this up. I'm not reading from notes. I wasn't prepared to talk about this, but my understanding from what I've read and what I've just described to the best of my memory was that in the best situation, in an emergency, it should unlock, but
But this terrorist activity, this
but
gentleman,
if it loses,
So
this terrorist,
yeah. So yesterday at the Trump Tower in Vegas, outside the Trump Tower, which is a lot of people spoke. This is really on the nose for the first day of January 2025 to have the Cybertruck on fire outside of the Trump. Kind of too on the nose, right? The writers need to be more creative with this one. But the fact is, they had to. The quote I saw from the emergency person said that that Elon Musk did them a favor by unlocking the vehicle, like
remotely.
So, yeah, like I don't know if there was some code or whatever. Like, and I was just thinking that you probably don't want to like auto lock your car if there's a fire inside.
I gotta just say, like maybe we're getting old, but I am also a guy who's uncomfortable. Like, I'm uncomfortable with the fact that the computer will lock me in my car. Right. And that there's no easy physical way for me to override that. Right. I'm also uncomfortable with the fact that an executive at Tesla gets to decide whether my car gets unlocked or not and can remotely just unlock my car.
Right.
Like, has direct control, like can like reach into my vehicle and override the decisions I'm making.
It's smart anything,
That's
right? Like,
even creepier though than the system just being able to do it. Like, it's like I find there are shortcomings to like, oh, Apple is updating the software and now my phone is down and all of that. But it's like there's this automatic process. Whereas the real sense that like you're part of this weird surveillance state is like Elon Musk gets to do a manual override on your personal vehicle, right? Like, is like, this is weird.
Like, for the first time in the history of Tesla, I believe this 2024 was the first time in the history of Tesla that they didn't increase sales year over year. Like, and I mean, you can connect some dots
there. PR over the Trump.
Well, it's PR, but also this big push, the noise, and I've been seeing them quite a bit in the GTA because I noticed them because they're really, really ugly. But Cybertrucks have arrived. Okay, they're really ugly, and my kids will tell you if I see one, I'm like, what an ugly car. Wait, they just look so mean and destructive. They don't look like they have good sight lines. I don't trust them near my kids when we're biking or driving.
I want to call them. I went to see one before I ever saw one in the wild. I saw one at the car show.
Yeah.
And I went there specifically to see it because from the drawings, and it's just like it looks like a cool thing. Like what I would have drawn thinking it was cool in grade 4.
Yeah, if you were 10 years old.
In 1985.
Yeah, right.
Let's say after you saw Back to the Future and you were like, let me make a big pickup truck version and it's going to be all steel. And then you draw the lines. It's like you could make it out of like blocks.
Right.
And so like maybe that's a bit on the nose of Elon Musk as like an overgrown
like, is
rich
it a giant
baby?
troll? Because
like,
I mean,
and it's armored, it's made of steel, and it's bulletproof, and all of that. But beyond that, like, so one of the frustrating things I thought, because they really are ugly in person, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, but taste is subjective. But like, I am somebody. My daughter and I, who's only 16, so she's not lived through a lot of other eras of cars, but like it's just like, why do all the cars have to look the same now? Why do all these cars have the same general aerodynamics? And there are reasons like gas mileage reasons and all of that, but it's like we look at these old classic cars and we've gotten sucked into a few reality shows where they restore classic cars on TV, and it's just like there's so many beautiful, weird, different shapes of cars, and some of them are ugly and some of them are whatever. So like in principle, I'm really a fan of like, even if it's ugly, at least it's different. And yet, the Cybertruck is like obnoxiously different.
Well, it's three things. It's ugly, it's impractical, and it's expensive. Like, it's all three of those things.
Yeah.
So if you're like 2 out of 3, that ain't bad, right? Like Mila said or whatever. But it's apparently anybody who needs that kind of a pickup, there's better value, and you'll have. It's not good for that purpose. It's
not functional at all.
No, it's not functional. So the only reason you'd buy
all these videos that are viral of them getting stuck in the mud in the snow, like they're apparently incapable of.
The defroster will brick it or something. You get all it's just you have to get her popcorn and watch the show. But to me, the only reason you're going to buy a Cybertruck is because people like me fucking hate it. Like, that's where we're at. It's like, right? Am I right?
Yeah, I used to think that about Hummers too. Like, part of the reason to have a Hummer is to just tell everybody, I'm a fucking dick. Deal with it, right?
So I've got the money, and this is a status thing, and I like Donald Trump, and I like Elon Musk, and I'm going to drive this because it drives you batshit crazy or whatever.
A lot of people have, like, apparently there's a big business now in Tesla bumper stickers that say, I bought it before we knew. right? Or I bought
And
it before
again,
we
I
knew
try
what
to
he was.
separate because you're right. Because humble Howard Glassman just got a Tesla. I got a guy across the street who drives a Tesla. And it wasn't that long ago. You can only go back maybe 6-7 years when a lot of sensible people I know were very excited that they were saving up because they wanted to buy a Tesla. Like this was
Yeah,
a very
yeah, and
it's
I think you don't even have to go back that far. Like basically, Elon as the world's biggest troll, and slash now Lex Luthor. Like
Well, how far back you got to go? Because
no, I think you only got to go.
when did he buy Twitter?
Yeah, I was going to say when he bought Twitter. So like probably 3-4 years ago.
Okay, okay.
Four,
I'll ask Cam
4
Gordon.
years ago. But before that, it's like there was some perceived virtuousness to buying an electric car.
Right,
and
no
this is
fossil fuels.
the highest end, most advanced kind of electric cars that were
Right,
coming
the
out at the
future.
time. So it's like, yeah, I'm making an investment in the future, right?
Right. But now I do. Now I think if there's somebody I cared for and I liked them, and then they said, "Hey, I got a new car," I'd be, "Oh, what'd you get?" "Oh, I got an e-vehicle." I'm like, "Okay, which one did you get?" And they said, "The Cybertruck." Honest to God, this is and again, I don't think there's any Cybertruck owners listening to Toronto Mike or reading the Toronto Star. I don't think these are things that Cybertruck owners would ever do. Actually, so we're preaching to the converted here, I think, but. I would basically, like, their stock would absolutely plummet. Like, I would be like, "Oh, you're a Cybertruck owner." And that would be kind of like finding out that they were, like, anti-vax and pro-Trump, and they wanted to be the 51st, they wanted us to become the 51st state. It's all of those things bundled up in this ugly, ugly car.
So it's a car that makes a statement.
It makes a statement.
There you go.
It's worth the $75K.
Statement
Although I did
vehicle.
read today, because they're very, Tesla's tricky with telling you sales per model. Like they group a lot of models together. And so I was reading this publication that kind of tracks it closely, and they were trying to find out how many Cybertrucks were delivered in the fourth quarter of 2024. And they've narrowed it down, they think, between 9 and 12,000, they think, okay? And the crux of this article, which I only read this morning, was what a low number that is compared to expectations, okay? Because I guess Elon was touting 500,000 at some point or whatever. And now, so 9 to 12 of these things were delivered in the fourth quarter of 2024. But I'm reading this article, and all I'm sitting there thinking is, I can't believe 9 to 12,000 people forked over, whatever it is, $75K or whatever, to own one of these. Now, where do you put it? Where do you park it? Oh my goodness. Okay, we can't keep going on.
Well, it's shiny.
It's shiny as hell. Don't use the defroster though, because that will brick it. So I was gonna here again.
It's like if, but it matches the ROM.
The
extension,
crystal.
Right? Yeah. They're kind of like similar design sensibility.
They're both chromy, I guess, shiny things. Okay, so like I said, we're gonna do 90 to 120 minutes. I see we're at 120 minutes, but I wanted to ask you on the way out, and then you have like a period where you can share anything that was on your mind on your drive here, and maybe we covered everything. But I'm just wondering, as we enter 2025, how's Olivia Chow doing?
I think she's doing okay. I spoke with her before
not
the
personally, I mean
Christmas
politically.
break, and she seemed to be doing all right. But no, I mean, I think we're going back into budget season, and I think we're going to find out now. I think there are a lot of people who are progressives in this city who, in theory, are Olivia Chow supporters, who may have voted for her or either enthusiastically or reluctantly because they thought maybe Josh Matlow or some other progressive candidate was their people. But like, who are disappointed that she's not picking big fights with Doug Ford, right? That she's not more visibly standing up for them on the things that they think she should be there standing up for them on. And her answer on that would be, and I think like explicitly, but I also think the more I've come to understand her philosophy of how political movements should work and how change works and all of that, is that she's got a few things that are really important to her that she thinks she can move the needle on less controversially, right? As long as she doesn't become too controversial. And so those are things like the school nutrition programs and affordable housing rent supplements and like getting new homeless shelters opened and a bunch of other things that, like last year's monumental tax increase, which is really the biggest political battle she took on, and it turned out to be easy win. Can like fund, and that those will be lasting things. And then she's trying to keep peace with the premier and the upper levels of government and get them to fund more of the things like transit expansion and more affordable housing projects and all of that. And so she's trying to get more with honey than she would get with vinegar, right? And so the thing about a strategy like that is we have to start seeing it pay off, right? Like we have to start seeing more of that results. And then I think the other thing is that she's coming into her second budget now. And last year she did the thing that for generations no Toronto politician they would say it was impossible. You just can't do it. You can't raise taxes 10%, 9%, right? Like it doesn't, and she did. And now I think a year later, maybe there are a lot of us who were trying to evaluate, did city services improve enough? Are the potholes filled? Are we catching back up? And maybe it's too soon to tell that after less than a year of paying that higher rate of taxes. But again, it's going to be interesting to see if she's looking at another 10% increase this year, or if it's back to closer to the rate of inflation. So, I mean, I think she's been doing okay. I think she's been disappointing some people because she hasn't done big flashy things of her own yet. She's done a lot of smaller things that are meaningful to her. And she hasn't, fought the big fights that she won. But now the next big thing is going to be this budget. And we'll wait and see how that goes, too. So,
well, I can't wait for your next visit, Ed. These are always educational, informative, entertaining. You're the real deal, man.
I hope so. I'm like a wind-up doll, though, right? You just pull the string, and I'll just keep talking about whatever it is until you distract me with something else.
You know me. I make sure I get my stuff that I want to talk about, but then, we have a little room to dance a little bit. On the note of the Cybertruck, though, and I agree 100% with this comment from YYZ Gord, because it's all I think about when I see the Cybertruck. He says that the Cybertruck reminds him of the Homer, and you might remember when Homer's brother ran the car manufacturer in Detroit or whatever, and then let Homer design a car for the everyman, and whatever Homer wanted for that car went, and they ended up with a car that was ugly. It wasn't useful. What's the word I'm looking for? It was impractical, and it was expensive, and that was the Homer. And YYZ Gord says this, but I agree. That's what happens when you let an idiot design a car. So if I see you next quarter, Ed, driving up in your new Cybertruck, I'm going to tell you to park it somewhere else. There's no room for it here, but there's always room for you.
I think, if they understand their market properly, what happens when you let an idiot design a car could be their tagline.
9,000 to 12,000 people got theirs delivered last quarter, and I would love to have a beer with those guys at Great Lakes and just find out if there's any regret that you spent this money on this big thing. You don't know where to park it. I bet you it's only a matter of time before underground parking lots ban it because it blows. It's got fire issues or whatever. And I would be curious whether it was worth it just to own the libs, just to make people like me go, what an ugly, ugly car. Maybe it is worth it. Depends how much
you
money
get a lot of attention anyway. So, and you get to be associated with Elon Musk and all that cool stuff.
Hey now. And that Elon's living on the property.
Not just
Mar-a-Lago?
Not just associated with him, but he can personally come in and
unlock it.
Unlock it for
my
you.
Code, Elon.
Elon, baby, you just tweet at him.
He is smart enough to stay.
Hey, can you get the engine warming up for me?
He's smart enough to live on the property of Mar-a-Lago in like Cato Kalin, because as you might know, the last person to talk to Donald Trump is the one who has the most influence. Yeah. So if Elon ever went home to see one of his 25 kids or something, Trump would hear from someone else, hey, that Elon thinks he's the president. Get rid of that guy, and that would be it. Yeah. So he's got to live. What a time we live in. Can you believe this is real? It's like we scripted this. I wouldn't believe it if it was a script.
Yeah, well, because it's not even a very good script. It's just absurd.
And that brings us to the end of our 1,610th show. Go to TorontoMike.com for all your Toronto Mike needs. Go to TorontoStar.com and subscribe. Do it. Good people like Ed Keenan and David Ryder and all these wonderful people are there. Much love to all who made this possible. That's Great Lakes Brewery, Palma Pasta, RecycleMyElectronics.ca, and Ridley Funeral Home. See you all tomorrow when Cam Gordon and Tyler Campbell, the VP of Sales, drops by for the quarterly FOTM cast. We'll discuss everything from the last quarter in the TMU. See you all then.